Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're located. This is Ruth Marie from CPSC, and I would like to welcome you to today's sponsored webinar, From Activity to Outcomes, How New Tools and Data Will Change Reporting Forever, presented by Dark Horse Emergency. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording so you can share it with others. At the end of the webinar, please contact Dark Horse Emergency directly for additional information, and be sure to visit their booth at the 2026 Excellence Conference, March 10 to 13, at the Creve Royale Convention Center in Orlando, Florida. With that, I will turn it over to Dark Horse Emergency President Daniel Haight and VP of Strategy Daryl Reed.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for attending. I see some people are still filtering in. Just a quick background. I'm the founder and president of Dark Horse Emergency, and I got my start as an analyst working at the University of Alberta doing a lot of the research that underpins our software and our services that we offer. And I will let one of our newest employees, Daryl Reed, introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Daryl Reed. I'm the Vice President of Strategy for Dark Horse Emergency. And I recently retired from a public service career. My last 5 years were as a CAO or a city manager for Strathcona County, Alberta. Before that, fire chief for the city of Vancouver, deputy fire chief for city of Toronto, and all through the ranks up to fire chief in Strathcona County. So try to bring the lens of both senior administration and elected official perspective, as well as that fire chief and fire service perspective. So, thank you.
All right, so just a brief bit of background about Dark Horse Emergency and what is our goal and role in this ecosystem. We're probably best known for predictive analytics. The research that we did at the university was all about predicting calls, predicting drive times, predicting performance, predicting lives saved, those types of things. And that's kind of baked into our DNA. But we ran across something early on, and I say this to my team all the time: getting the right answer is half the battle. Convincing people that it's the right answer is the other half. I'm sure many of you have run into this in your careers, and so the way we deal with that is we have a very strong emphasis on visual data design. In fact, we have a sister company called Dark Horse Visualization, or used to be Dark Horse Analytics, that does just this. We visualize data for large organizations like Harvard or USA Facts or some of these larger foundations. And we find that this is very important in communication. And so getting past that halfway point of having the right answer to that next part where people actually adopt the right answer. And lastly, again, probably going back to our university roots, we have a huge emphasis on rigor in our data processing. And so we know that the decisions that you're going to make are life or death decisions. The recommendations you're going to make, excuse me, are recommendations that depend on accurate data. And so probably unlike most other firms, we invest a ton of effort whenever we implement our software. I think on average, we spend about 500 hours with each new client in the first year, just dialing in the data, making sure that your performance reports historically either match what the software is telling you, or you have an understanding of what has changed to make that trustworthy data so that you can make confident decisions. So with that out of the way, actually, maybe just mention one more thing. We've aligned our company around the two main types of analyses that you do as a fire department: risk analysis and standards of cover. And our two products, Dark Horse Response, that's kind of our living standard of cover, and Dark Horse Risk. It's a newer product, and that is focused around your community risk assessment. So you can kind of see that in the format that we're going to go through today. I want to talk a little bit more about predictive analytics, and I want to demystify that a little bit. Many of you have probably been involved with projects of forecasting growth in the community, forecasting population, forecasting the need for fire departments. Forecasting is a part of predictive analytics, but it's not the same thing. And predictive analytics really comes down to where you find the true value is in the difference between expectation and reality. I think, I forget who said this, but all forecasts are wrong, but some of them are useful. The one thing we know for sure is when we predict performance or call volumes or firefighter injuries or what have you, we know we are almost certainly going to be wrong to the exact precision of the forecast. But the forecast itself is very valuable. And we're going to talk about this theme as we go through here, is using forecasting and using predictive modeling to say, given certain conditions, this is what we expect. And as we deviate from that expectation, that's where we see the real value. And so this is just like what your doctor does when he says, I expect your blood pressure to go down because I'm giving you this medication. It's the same thing our government says. We expect economic growth to go up because we're reducing taxes. It's that predictive analytics, that expectation versus reality. And when it doesn't connect, where those differences are, that's where you get the real insights for your organization. With that out of the way, let's jump into the agenda for today. Kind of 3 chapters in this talk today. We're going to talk about response time. We're going to talk about prioritizing your investments in your organization. And we're going to talk about the invisible metric more in the context of risk and risk reduction. So without further ado, if you have any questions as we go through, please write them in the chat or in the questions, and we'll try to keep an eye on that to make sure that we are responding as needed. So as you're looking to get accredited, that's what everyone here is at least considering if you aren't already on the accreditation path or re-accrediting. One of the key things that we would look at is your response performance. And you're required to kind of monitor this and to have a process in place to address issues of response performance, amongst a whole bunch of other things. But response performance is one of the key metrics that you'll be tracking. And perhaps you see something that looks like this as you're managing your service. You're looking back at the last year and you're saying, wow, our target is this dotted line here, and our performance is dropping below that target. I wonder what we should do. One of the questions you'll often hear, whether it's from your stakeholders, from city managers, maybe even from your firefighters or yourself, is this idea, well, response times don't matter for the vast majority of calls. And that is true. But I wonder how many people have done the research to find out, well, how many calls does it actually matter for in my community? Even if even if there is not a life or death component to a response, families are not going to be happy if you take half an hour to arrive while their house burns down behind them. So the customer service aspect of a response and a quick response is certainly important. Secondly, when you're standing in front of a judge and jury, when they are suing you because you do not follow the belief that quick response is important for the vast majority of calls, therefore you don't have any standards, the judge and jury are not going to be too sympathetic to that argument. They're going to say, this is the standard. Why aren't you following this standard? And I think everyone's on this page already. You wouldn't be investing in accreditation if you didn't recognize that moving towards a standard, even if you never reach it, is far better than just saying, well, I don't think the standard is important most of the time. There's actually another component to a quick response that is maybe less obvious to people. There's this beautiful feedback loop between staff morale and response performance. And departments that have cracked this nut and kind of got that flywheel spinning, they're going to have a culture of professionalism. And in order to hit a good response time, whether that's fast turnouts or better call handling or your gear being in the right place at the right time, all of that quick response requires certain things to be in place. And then it feeds back and it provides, as you get better at response, you get a better morale in your organization and a more professional organization and a more trustworthy organization. Your entire culture is intertwined with your performance. People are proud of the work they do. And again, one of those levers is setting a goal to have fast response, but also setting a goal to have a strong culture and strong morale in your organization. In fact, one of the things we notice and we look for when we're working with clients, if we see really long turnout times, often that's a sign of poor morale in the organization. So back to that question of how many incidents does it actually matter for? We did some research and we've looked into, what is the average in the US? So let me introduce Somewhereville, USA, population 100,000. So you can kind of take this as if it is your community, if you're exactly 100,000 people, and if you're 200,000, just times these numbers by two. But the total calls you would expect in your community is about 12,000. Of those, 4,500 would be fire calls, 7,500 would be EMS. And then if you kind of broke that down further, you would see that emergent fires is about 1,000, or emergent fire responses, not necessarily fires. And emergent EMS is about 6,500. So including your rescue calls and motor vehicle accidents, etc. The total number of time critical incidents within that fictional city of Somewhereville is about 600 or 610. So just around 5% of those calls. And this is the breakdown of what you would expect from incidents, a combination of medical and fire. So, defibrillation and ALS for cardiac arrest, probably about 60 incidents a year, about one a week. Rapid stroke routing and TPA thrombectomy, maybe about 100 per year. If there's an opioid crisis in your community, then you might have more than 150 calls. If it's maybe more of a retirement community, you might have less. But all of these calls are calls where seconds matter, where minutes matter. A quick response is absolutely critical. That isn't to say there aren't other calls where quick response isn't necessary for those other reasons I laid out. And there's probably, anaphylactic shock and some of these other ones which are more rare, but where that quick response is still very important to survival of the citizens of your community. So kind of rolling this all up, about 8% of your emergent calls, about 5% of your total calls really do benefit from a quick response. The problem is, it's not like in the movies where the music starts to get dramatic and everyone moves in slow motion as they burst through the door to rescue the family or to, intubate the person who's choking. It's just your everyday job, as you know, to respond quickly to those calls. It seems like any other day on the job, but those lives are saved probably several times a week that you're making a difference in somebody's either their life or the quality of their life. So, do seconds really matter? Is probably the next question. And we did some research on how many people would actually survive if there was no response. So, what if your department did not exist, or was on strike, or was defunded entirely? So, of those 610 incidents, some people would still survive, even if they had a cardiac arrest or even if, they needed to be extricated from their MVA. So you end up with about 221 survivors, even without your fire response, or even if that response was, say, 30 or 40 minutes. Okay. So this is an interesting picture because this basically says this is the value of having a professional fire department in your community of 100,000. The difference that you make by having just a reasonable response, an average response time of 8 minutes or better, you improve the number of people that survive from 200 to about 450. So the value of having a response is basically a doubling in the survival in your community. Basically a life a day, almost a life a day that you are saving by just existing, by responding to those water rescues or those residential fire rescues that happen in a typical year. Um, but here's the interesting part. If you were to improve that response time by 2 minutes through various activities, you would save an additional 20 to 25 lives in that community of 100,000. So seconds do matter, minutes do matter. They don't matter for every call, but even in a mid-sized city of 100,000, we're talking about a funeral every other week that you are preventing by having a high performing response to those critical calls. So this kind of puts some numbers on just one aspect, to say nothing for all the other types of improvements that you're going to see by having fast response. So again, the value of a decent response, you're doubling the survival rate in your community. The value of high performance response is those 25 additional lives saved. And so just to kind of create a rule of thumb for your community, for every 100,000 people in your population, 12 lives a minute is what you save, and you're doubling survival by existing. So I want to turn it over to Chief Reed here, and he's going to talk a bit about his experience on both sides of the fence. In fact, he has a very interesting background. He used to be the president of the union before becoming the fire chief and then becoming the CAO. So he's sat in all three seats before and is able to kind of talk from the broader perspective. So over to you, Daryl.
Thanks, Dan. It's interesting. Dan alluded to before that, in essence, departments with high morale, departments with high levels of staff engagement put out fires faster. They respond more effectively to EMS calls as well. And I work now for Dark Horse because they helped me a lot. They helped our departments a lot be successful. In one case, eventually achieving accreditation, and in other cases, achieving resource needs, business case wins that were really, really critical. But it all goes back to your people and using analytics and predictive modeling to convince your people and show your teams how their work makes a difference, how their improvements make a difference. And talking about in all of the services I've been in, I've been lucky enough to see improvements of 1.5 to 2 minutes in reductions in response times. And in one case, seeing a department become NFPA 1710 compliant, despite the fact that it had a 10% budget cut just before it started that path to 1710 compliance. And in dispatch, we still see when we take on new clients that QA processes and different dispatching processes, although the intention is great, the accurate collection of data, and we're proud to track our success in that, it often is adding a minute and a half, or even more to dispatch intervals. So one of the easy steps that can be taken, we have found, and in the departments I was in as well, was taking a look at those QA systems and fast tracking the initial steps of them to get the resources moving towards the fire or EMS call, whatever it might be, and making adjustments as you go forward. So, obviously we know all about pre-alerts and traffic light preemption technologies and all those sorts of things, but getting basic with dispatch and, identifying the general nature of the call and moving the right resources towards that call immediately has a profound effect on saving seconds and minutes. And Dan just talked about what that can mean for your community. Just recently, one of our clients saved well over a minute just by making those adjustments. And I've seen reductions of over 90 seconds making those sorts of adjustments. So it's not that you don't want to still have a great QA system and with dispatch and track your results effectively and improve things constantly, but it has had an impact on getting resources where they need to be in a timely fashion. Turnout times is a fascinating one to me because you are considering or have already got CPSC accreditation. How many departments, when you do the initial analysis, is turnout time the actual kind of the barrier to achieving the goals that you want to achieve? So using some strategies. Like one of the challenges is your firefighters are smart and they look at the standards that you're holding them to, and they're impossible. You want to be out of the station in X amount of time, 90% of the time, and it's impossible. So something that we did in a couple of the departments was actually go to stations, talk to the crews about where the hardest part to get to the trucks, the location in the station that is a realistic location for firefighters to be in when a call comes. Maybe it's a gym or a kitchen, dorm, whatever it might be. How long does it take to get from that point to the truck? And then after actually timing it, it's very, for firefighters, it's reasonable. They know that we're tracking them against the hardest target to making that the actual response goal for that station. And you do that, you've kind of created an equity of sorts. Small stations have a shorter time, but it makes sense to everybody. Big stations have longer turnout times that are expected, and that makes sense to everybody too. It allows you to build, firefighters compete, right? Type A personalities, sports backgrounds, whatever it might be, but they love to compete. So once you've made things equitable, being really transparent and open with performance information is a really great tool to use as well. So now a captain on one shift can compare their performance to the other shifts on the same truck. How are they doing? They can compare themselves to the rest of the city, all the trucks in the city on their shift, whatever those comparisons would look like. We're the fastest engine, we're the fastest engine crew at this station, whatever the case might be. Again, playing on that competitiveness when you have factual data and you can put it in front of people and they can absorb it, but they believe it, is absolutely huge to performance. And then something else you can do if you have the opportunity is compare your department's performance to that of others. In one case, we made a Facebook post that compared our city's performance to 3 other cities' performances for turnout times. There's a lot of pride in the department, of course. They want to be leading the way. We were 4th, and 6 weeks later, we were 1st. And sometimes it's awareness, and sometimes it's just, tapping into that desire that people have to be the best. And those things were free. They were a tiny amount of work, and they had profound impacts on our overall performance and response. So I work for an analytics company. We have amazing tools that can tell you in great detail tweaks and adjustments that can be made. My point is start with the people and how you can get information to your staff to help them see how they're doing and figure out ways to do better. We learn things like every bay in a larger station, say between a kitchen and the furthest truck away, 4 bays away, every bay is approximately 3 seconds. Put the busiest truck in the bay closest to the kitchen. There's often, the battalion chief goes closest. It's a preference of rank or seniority or whatever the case might be. Put the busiest truck closest, it's going to yield the highest response improvements. It's a little thing, makes a surprising difference, especially in a big department. Transparently sharing information, making it real for crews so that they think what they're being assessed against is fair and realistic, and letting them see how they're doing against crews in their station, crews across the city, and crews in other cities. And you can see some pretty profound results from that. Of course, resource and station location, something that we are really good as a company at helping departments make decisions about. You can make interesting decisions. You might be in a city with a lot of densification and real estate is at a premium, and maybe your choices are going to be upstaffing trucks. Maybe you're going to have 5 firefighters on an engine because that's going to get you to your ERF in an area where you don't have bays to add trucks. We have trouble sometimes making those cells for more resources, but when you can paint the picture of how an ERF actually yields outcomes that save lives and reduce injuries and reduce damage to property, can be pretty powerful to understand which levers are realistic for you to pull in your organization and help you understand what the outcomes are going to be from pulling them. And then focusing on those people things. That's the advice. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, but you need to take care of all the things that you control: turnout times, dispatch times, putting your resources that you have in the best places so that when you go forward to council or even senior administration, you're a good investment. You're a good investment because you're maximizing the performance of the resources you have. So why wouldn't we want to give you more resources? And I think too many times departments go forward to councils looking for resources, and they aren't performing well. Their turnout times are terrible. Their dispatch times are bad. Why should we spend millions of dollars more investing in a team that's not owning what it already has? So thanks, Dan.
All right, thanks, Daryl. And I can't emphasize that enough. The process we recommend is, clean up your own backyard before you ask for others to support you in your home improvement. Um, so just keying off of some of what Daryl said, one of the questions when you are going through this process of accreditation is you're going to build your standard of cover document. And how do you know where to make those investments? I mean, there is the NFPA standards that you can compare against. You can compare against 1710 or 1720. But this is again where that predictive analytics, that expectation versus reality comes into play. So you might look at that line of decline in your performance, or maybe it's, you're sitting at 70% response in your 1710 target. And you think to yourself, okay, is it we don't have enough people? Is it long turnout times? We don't have enough trucks. We don't have enough stations. What is it that is driving that? The problem is it might be a host of other things. It could be just, call growth or suburban sprawl or poor road network design. We saw one department where they put in traffic calming to try to, make it more pedestrian friendly. And it basically meant that certain roads, you could not fit the fire trucks down those roads anymore. So there's a whole host of levers that you can pull, some of them within your control, some of them not so much. And how do you actually figure out what is driving your performance, or what is the one that has the most leverage within your system? So one of the things we've done is we've started to compile our findings from the clients we've worked with. And what we found is if you can cut 10 seconds off your performance, so your response in your call center. So instead of, at 2 minutes, now it's a minute and 50 seconds to dispatch, or instead of a minute and a half, it's a minute and 20. That 10 seconds is a 1% response performance improvement. This is, again, kind of for that average size, 500,000 to 1 million city. Actually, this is a larger city than Somerville. But in some cases, we've seen this as much as, 5 seconds is worth 1%. And this might hold for an entire minute where that relationship holds. So you're getting a significant improvement by just knocking a few seconds off that QA process, changing the order with which we pass that off to dispatch. Similarly, if your turnout times improve by 10 seconds, you've got that 1% improvement. Now, here's the interesting one. That's the same value as adding another truck to your system, a staffed vehicle to your system. That's 1% improvement. And so when you're going to council, you should not be asking for more units until you've taken care of your backyard, the things you can control: turnout times, your call handling times, your dispatch times. That one unit that gets you 1%, again, this is in a larger city. In a smaller community, you might get a 5% improvement. Again, these vary depending on your community. The same is true of a station. Adding a station in that community might be 1% in that larger city, maybe 2 or 3% in a smaller community. So you can see that investment trade-off. We call this kind of putting things in a common currency. Similarly, again, something you might have more control over is your scene time. Every 15 minutes of scene time reduction is a 1% improvement, whether that's at a fire scene and freeing up vehicles that are no longer and crews that are no longer needed, or that's at an ambulance scene moving on more quickly to either kind of catch and release or to drop them off and to bring them to transport. So that 15 minutes is worth 1%. Again, that's kind of in a busier, more metro system. It again varies depending on the size of your service. Having a targeted move up plan. Now, again, this is one of the more controversial things in EMS in particular, where you have very aggressive kind of system status planning, and you're always moving crews for whenever a call comes in, everybody moves. We think that most of the value is actually in probably the one or two moves that have the biggest leverage, and we can do this analysis to find out, when a call comes here, you need to backfill here. You're pulling from that quiet station with 5 bays into that very busy station with 1 vehicle. And you're going to do that on an ongoing basis. If you can't, maybe you can't expand that station or change your deployment, but having a very targeted backfill probably gets you 80 to 90% of the benefit to those, 2 or 3 moves that you would do periodically. 15 minutes of wall time is worth 1%. So if you're tied up at the hospital for an hour and a half, if you can get that down to an hour, that's a 2% improvement in your response performance. Traffic preemption. If you don't have that in your community, if you have nothing, there are smart traffic preemption tools out there now that will even help clear the way for you on your routes to your scenes to kind of deal with some of the congestion. In fact, there's a company that does railway prediction. It lets you know when the train's coming through town with a high degree of accuracy. So maybe you deploy from a different station on the right side of the tracks that might be even a bit further away because there's going to be a train. That can be worth up to 5%. And we did this in a mid-sized community looking at the analysis. This is actually my favorite. I call it the free lunch. Many communities have built the first due areas or your catchment areas, back in 1987, when the first real master plan came out, and hasn't been updated since. And your city has changed, your road networks have changed, your population has grown, and you're sending your units to calls that they are not the closest unit to. And just changing the boundaries of those catchment areas could be worth up to 5% in your community. 30-second improvements, 40, 50-second improvements are not unheard of citywide just by changing those boundaries. So that's a good one to look at if you're trying to build that continuous improvement loop that CPSC and accreditation is trying to foster. Similarly with call prevention, in a larger community, say 500,000 people, cutting 500 calls might be worth 1% to your performance. So I'm going to shift gears and kind of show you how we derive these numbers in communities we work with. And I'm going to show you the Dark Horse deployment app in a community. So this is an actual community on the outskirts of Seattle called Pierce County. I have permission from the chief there to share this. So when he initially started working with us, he's like, our NFPA performance is pretty abysmal. We're at about 20% performance. We can respond first due in 6 minutes, 20 seconds, 20% of the time. And if we look closely at the stations, we can see there's only a very small green halo around those stations. And why is that? Well, it's because their turnout and call handling times are exceptionally long. They're close to 3 to 4 minutes just before that, the wheels start turning on their vehicle. So trying to get to calls within, you basically have 2.5 minutes left to get there. It's just not going to happen. So the first thing that we did was we looked at, well, let's reduce those setup times, right? So career, they're between 3.5 and 4 minutes for their career firefighters. And let's change those to, let's cut off. What if we actually got to an NFPA standard? What would happen? So NFPA call handling and NFPA turnout. Suddenly the map turns green. We go from 20% performance to 61% performance. So that improvement of cleaning up your backyard just by dealing with the things that you can control is substantial. Now, there are other things they can do. They can look at reducing the changing the catchment areas. They can look at some, targeted preemption and so forth. But let's just look at what if they were to add a station to the area where it mattered most. And so we can look at this map and I can see these red areas where you have high incident counts. This is a view of their incidents, and this is a view of their drive times. We have trouble getting to, and we combine those two, basically multiply them together, and we get this performance view. And it basically says the areas with large hexes and dark colored hexes are the areas I have trouble getting to. Now, this one here is right on the edge of the community. Maybe there's a mutual aid agreement that we could have with a neighboring community that might be able to respond there. So I'm not actually going to place a station there. I'm going to look in this area here, and I'm just going to add a new station. And I'm going to see what impact adding that station has on my performance. Again, this is that idea of expected performance or expectation, predicted expected performance. And it shows me that I improved my overall performance by about 1.5. So you can see where I get that. Adding a new station to a mid-sized community is about 1%, 1.5% performance improvement. I can make changes to that. I can say, I don't really like that. And very quickly I can move it over here. Maybe Councillor Jones has some land free there that he's willing to support building on. And it's like, nope, that isn't quite as good. That's about half as good, or only 0.8% improvement. I can see the impact that has on my drive times. I can see the impact that has on my incidents. So, let's go back to where we were before, and let's see what does that do in terms of the workload on that crew, because it isn't just about response performance. Is that station going to be busy enough to justify the effort that they're putting in? So I'm going to go, instead of looking at fire districts, I'm going to convert that over to the dynamic zones. So this is effectively building that closest unit response catchment area around every station. And it's looking at the performance within that zone. I'm going to get to, about 2/3 of the calls in my target time there. And how many incidents is that? Well, I'm going to deal with about 1,300 calls. And that's a decently busy station. It's going to have 1,300 calls. It's stealing about 500 of them from station 69, and is stealing about 700 of them from station 72, which again is still really busy with over 3,000 calls. So now I have a sense of even how large I should make that station. And so I can say, okay, instead of just a single engine, let's add another unit. Let's add a medic there. In fact, let's add another unit. Let's add a ladder truck there. Lots of high rises in the area. In fact, let's staff that ladder with 4 crews, and let's run them 24 hours a day. They're all going to be career, and we're not going to have a separate day and night system. You could roll it out and say we're going to start by adding a day crew, and then we're going to move on to adding a night ambulance as well. But I can see the value of those changes instantly, and I can do that analysis with the tool instantly. So this is just a very quick example of what we call kind of our living standard of cover tool, where you can look at not just my first due performance. You can look at your ERF performance, ERF high, ERF medium, ERF low, and you can see by adding people, adding trucks to the right places, are you actually moving the dial? Again, all predicated on kind of taking care of the things we could take care of. All right, so I'm going to shift gears, jump back to the process. When you do that, and when we work with clients, you end up with something like this. We can say, okay, traffic preemption in this community is worth 5%. Moving one station is worth 2%. Cutting 10 minutes off the hospital is worth 3%. Adding one squad is worth 6%. So you kind of get that idea. You can roll that all up together into a picture that looks something like this. This is from a master plan we helped build with a community in Canada here, where they say, today with our current deployment, this is our performance. But if we improve our turnout times and our call handling and the things we can take care of, we're going to jump from a 75% performance, from a 72 to about a 75% performance. If we add that next crew in station 1, We can see us jump up to 3.5, et cetera, et cetera. So there's different kind of plans they can do, adding stations, moving stations, and looking at both today and then the lighter gray is in the future, what is possible 10 years hence. We can also see what that does to their ERF performance. Improving setup times doesn't really improve my ERF. In this community, they had a 10% chance of being able to get 16 firefighters on scene in a structure fire. But as soon as they added that new crew to Station 4, that jumped up to about 40%, and they add that new station and crew to Station 5, and that jumps them up to, a respectable 60% performance. And so they have a clear path that they can bring to council that says, we've cleaned up our own backyard, and here's the investments you can make over the next 5 to 10 years to actually bring us up to a position where we're sitting at a 60 to 70% ERF and an 80 to 85% first due performance. Okay? I'm just going to check if there are any questions. And there is. So the question was the hexes that we show on the map, how do we decide on that size? Some of it's based on performance. If you're a community like Toronto, and we try to do them, 200 yards by 200 yards for each hex, you'd end up with the software not being able to do it. We typically aim for kind of a 500-yard neighborhood-sized that we can work with. That's kind of a smaller area. We chose hexes like that because they are regular, and also the way hexes are set up, they don't kind of squares actually ends up being some boundary problems, like roadways and highways and such. We just find that that's a very powerful way to show performance in a way that's very intuitive for people to interpret what's happening. I'm going to turn it back to Daryl, again, referencing that thing I said at the beginning. Having the right answer is half the battle. Communicating that appropriately, whether it's with the staff, the union, senior admin, or council, I think Daryl has some insights there on how to do so.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And just to reiterate, when you're starting the journey, the QA journey, the improvement journey, the accreditation journey, there are probably no departments who can improve their performance by adding stations as much as they can improve their performance by improving turnout times and dispatch interval times. If you get to the point where that's not true, where the next most impactful change is adding a truck to a station or adding firefighters to a truck, you're in an incredible place. And that's where I'll kind of start is with council. With counselors, we just need to be a great investment. It's competitive. Of course, you need to understand sort of the platform that each counselor was elected on, what matters most to them. We would make spreadsheets of those and have all the briefings to understand the needs and hopes and dreams of every counselor. How can you fit what you know about your performance, the data that you understand, to show each counselor how either you're meeting their goals or there are opportunities for them to support you to meet their goals? So do your initiatives, do your business cases, do the investments that you recommend meet the specific requirements, needs, hopes of each of your counselors, and then show them. An interesting way to do that is in ward systems, where you can show the differences in performance to a counselor between their ward and their neighboring ward, as an example. There's some risk with the ways that you might want to communicate that, but frequently fire chiefs and leaders are going to have opportunities to have one-on-ones with counselors or committees, and you can share that information, and it can be really, really powerful for you, of course. You do not want to be asked the question in a council meeting, why should we support this business case when it's taking 2.5 or 3 minutes for firefighters to respond to a call from a station, as an example. With regards to city managers, I mean, that was a perspective I had for the last 5 years. And obviously, I was very fire biased before I became a city manager. And to do my job professionally, I had to overcome that. You're worried about, dog parks and in-ground infrastructure to support the development of schools and transit systems and field houses for recreation and all those sorts of things. fire departments have an opportunity that their data and their successes can be extremely compelling. You can rise right to the top of the priority list done right. You know, the days of people are dying in the streets, that argument, of course, comes back against you now. It's not really considered a valid argument. Dan's provided some great information on how seconds or minutes matter and how actual lives can be saved in your community. You know, so take that proactive approach. Here's the positive outcomes that will happen if we get these resources, not here's the negative things that will happen if we don't get the resources. I think that's a really important way to message things. But you have the data at your fingertips, and you can develop the capability to show a city manager that that you should be the priority, that the recommendations of things for you are going to be great for the community that he or she serves along with you. You know, insurance savings from increased resources, those sorts of things can have a big impact. So work on the strategies of how to communicate with those decision makers and use your data to build the message that is purpose made to convince each one of them based on their needs, requirements, and expectations. And then for staff, like, you know, so it's so common to see staff have one view of the performance or the outcomes achieved by an organization, and the fire chiefs and leadership team have a different view. You know, join the views, show staff the data, show staff why changes are happening and what the outcomes of those changes will be. And when the outcomes are achieved or not achieved, show staff how things have developed, what's different now, how much of a difference is the department making because of tweaks or adjustments, or, you know, moving an aerial that was in the same place for 100 years and you moved it somewhere else, and now the aerial is doing twice as many calls and has had a positive impact twice as many times. That crew will be happy about that. They may not have wanted to move, but they might be really happy about the actual impact that they're having on safety and service delivery, and even being busier, you know, in their community. Don't be scared. We've talked about it before. Part of transparent data sharing with staff is the honest look at how they're doing, kind of that report card. You know, my kids hate that I can look up their marks in real time now at school. I'm sure glad that wasn't a possibility when I was a kid in school. But having that capability for firefighters and dispatchers and all of your inspectors, all of your staff, to show how they're doing, how they've improved, or maybe gone the other way, how they're doing compared to their peers or their peer teams. It's really, really powerful. And it all spins back to the first thing I said, which is hardly any department can improve as much with new stations, trucks, and firefighters and dispatchers as it can improve by actual human leadership and people buying in that turnout times and dispatchable times matter. So, you know, and this is data management that can be done arm in arm with your union as well. You know, trust, openness, sharing outcomes, constantly updating on how performance, on how you know, design changes to the systems are yielding performance changes that matter to your stakeholders. And that's one of the things I love about the tools, including the one that Dan was just demonstrating to you, is you can sit down with the crew, sit down with the team, sit down with union leaders, sit down with counselors. I've sat in a council meeting with a tool like that and had counselors pick where they wanted a new station to be, and then showing the counselors where the data says the new station needs to be, and received a unanimous vote in favor of a station that wasn't necessarily going to be passed that day. But they had buy-in, they had thought about it, and they trusted the results of the data and where it said that station needed to go. So, you know, use it to your advantage. It's a great communications tool, and we're all about communicating with humans and helping humans understand why. Thanks, Dan.
Great. All right. Thanks, Daryl. We're getting a little close on time. I'm going to skip through some of the things here. I want to shift gears now, and we're going to talk about something else. Does anyone recognize who this person is? Just put a thumbs up in the comments if you do. I'm gonna bet the answer is no. Oh, a few people do. Maybe you've heard me give this talk. I think this person is probably the greatest hero that nobody has ever heard of. His name is Stanislav Petrov. He's a Russian who, during the Cold War, right after the Russians shot down a Korean airline flight that happened to have a member of Congress from the U.S. Congress on board, tensions are really high. His sensors said there had been a launch. The doctrine was as soon as there's a launch, he does not get permission from anyone. He needs to launch the nuclear bombers from the Soviet Union. A few seconds later, he saw 5 more launches on the computer screen, suggesting that this was a preemptive American nuclear strike. And so his requirement was to respond. And he says, you know what? I just didn't think it was a nuclear attack, so I refused to launch. In doing so, he probably saved, I don't know, 50 million lives. But again, no one's ever heard of him. In fact, the Soviets fired him for disobeying orders and not following his doctrine. Uh, and he kind of died in obscurity in Russia. But the same is true of prevention. The perfect response, leaving the burning building, carrying the baby, getting your picture on the front page of the newspaper, uh, gets all the attention. And we're all about great response. And we've been talking about response up till now. But the person who actually changed out the batteries in the smoke alarm so no one had to do a rescue, or talked to the family about removing the brush from the edge of their house and prevented the fire, that person is as much of a hero. And so unfortunately, we end up with something that looks kind of like this, right? We invest 99% of our budget in response, very little in prevention. And it's a little bit unbalanced, let's say, like this arm wrestler from Germany. I'm going to skip through this on CRA, and I'm going to talk about just some of the research we've done on call prevention and some of what we found. Again, these are peer-reviewed studies or case studies from kind of credible organizations like FEMA or the NFPA or Vision 2020. Doing a home safety inspection or smoke alarm inspection program in targeted areas can actually reduce the number of fires and fire deaths by 50%. That's a huge deal. Doing fall prevention programs in targeted communities reduces those fall calls, which are often a pretty big chunk, by 25%. Just doing enforcement of your, inspection violations, starting to charge, frequent false alarmers can reduce those calls by 15%. Finding your high users, your frequent flyers, and working with social agencies in your community to help reduce their dependence on the ambulance service when it's actually other services that they need can reduce those by 30%. And California found that having incentives for homeowners to clear brush from around their home and to make their homes fire smart and fire safe reduced some of those fires by that particular type of fires by 40%. So pulling that all together, we end up with a pretty big chunk of calls averted and a pretty big chunk of lives saved due to prevention activities. Similar to what we showed about, speeding up your response, we get the same kind of results from these types of interventions. You can basically reduce your calls by about 10% by doing targeted prevention, which will equate to about 12 or 13 lives per year. Now, again, this is going to vary. This is for that kind of Somewhereville 100,000 size community, but there are things that you can do that will make a difference there. I'm going to not dwell on this too long. I want to jump to some real life risk reduction. We have a tool called Dark Horse Risk that helps you deal with these kinds of risk prioritization in your community. Where's the biggest lever that I can pull? I'm going to turn it over to Daryl to talk about some of these.
Thanks, Dan. And we just have a question too. And after initial setup and training, how dependent are Dark Horse users when they have an aha moment after hours? Are they able to run their own analysis, or do they require help from Dark Horse staff? Well, one of our values, one of our main goals is that we teach you to fish. So the goal is that the tools are ones that your team can use to do your own analysis. Of course, we're there to help and provide guidance if it's a unique thing or something new that you're working through. But the goal is absolutely for your teams to use the tools along with all the other tools they have very effectively internally.
So I know we're getting close to time here, so I'll let Daryl take it away. You might have to kind of skip through
Sure.
the ones of these that are important, you think.
Sure. I'll just give some examples of the risk tool here, Dan, if you want to talk about talking about Unified Fire Authority. So, so Unified Fire Authority had in their community, which is complex, there are 9 cities in the county, all combined together under the protection of one fire service. This is they use layers of different demographics and whatnot, and combine that with analysis of actual call responses to determine overdoses with the goal to be where do Narcan kits need to go in that community. So you can see on the right hand side, they've picked the different modifiers that they feel are relevant. There's some expertise and local knowledge there that helps with that. It identifies the hexes with the highest risk. You can drill down into that, see what the overdose risk is in those locations, and it will actually provide you with a ranked list of where Narcan kits need to go. We can jump to the next one. So Dubuque, and apologize for my Western Canadian pronunciation if it's a little bit off. But in Dubuque, similar sort of thing, funding for AED locations. Again, they map out the various demographics, older than 65, employment levels, all of that. And they're able to provide a prioritized list of the best places where AEDs need to be installed in that community. Of course, it also considers where AEDs already are. In Pierce, this was a per building county-wide structure fire risk index. So they used census data, tax assessments to establish value, all those sorts of things. And they were able to drill down into building a priority list for both building inspections and also operational pre-plans, and rank the buildings one after another is considered a very accurate tool for taking the limited resources you have for CRR and helping them adjust the right things first. And then spring, I worked in Toronto after the ice storm, and one of the things that caught me off guard as a new member of that department from somewhere else was how many CO poisonings there were from generator use in the city, including fatal ones. Spring, Texas, following Hurricane Beryl, had a similar challenge. And actually, in a lunch meeting one day, their team decided that they felt they could use the risk tool, a bunch of demographic layers applied to predict where it was most likely generators were being unsafely used at that time. And they actually sent crews out to the areas that were identified. They listened for generators. They went to doors, knocked on doors, and helped people move forward to either safe use of generators or cessation of use. Had an immediate impact on CO calls in the municipality. So there's an example of a kind of a real-time that day change that was made for public safety. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Daryl. So, pulling it all together, uh, response times do matter, about 12 lives a minute. There is a free lunch out there. There are things you can do, things like bystander CPR programs, etc., that are equivalent to spending huge amounts of money on stations and so forth. And a call prevented is better than even the best response, even though you don't get the credit for it. It's the whole goal of these predictive models is to start giving you the credit for it. So our dream as a company is, instead of reporting these things, this is from our software, kind of the dashboarding monitoring part of what we do. We would love to be able to report things like this. How many incidents did we avoid? How many lives did we save? How many injuries did we prevent from both risk reduction and response improvement? So that you're starting to report things that are truly meaningful to council, instead of just, hey, we're approaching NFPA performance. So with that, we'll open it up for maybe have time for 1 or 2 questions. Otherwise, we wish you all the best. Sorry, I'm adding something to the one question that someone asked was about can we be taught how to fish? The answer absolutely is yes. But I think there's one other thing that we do that is unique. We assign a fire analyst to every client, and they meet with you every month. And these are people who These are not, it's not a call center with people who can hardly speak English. These are people who understand the fire business and they understand analytics and our tools. And they're able to walk through things with you to solve unique problems. The examples that Daryl gave you, those are collaborations between our team and our actual clients. This presentation is going to be recorded. You will have access to it. And like I said, in answering some of the questions, some of that information that I shared at the beginning will be presented both in published research. We are working with a university to try to get an official peer-reviewed publication, but those tend to take a couple years to come to fruition. In the meantime, we're going to release a white paper with links to all the published research that fed into those results, because we think we should be talking about outcomes, not just about activities, and we think that it is possible to do so. And with that, I think we are done. Thanks, everyone. Please reach out. Our email addresses are there. We'd love to go into a lot more depth and find out if you're a fit, your community is a fit for our service and our software. All the best.
Thank you to Dan and Daryl, and thank you to everyone for attending. An email will be coming shortly with a link to the webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.